Hello, everyone. Welcome to MLK Library. I have my notes here so I don't forget them. So, hello, welcome to Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. My name is Mary Ann James Daly. I am the Director of Public Services for the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. And I am especially pleased to introduce these two artists tonight. So, poet and essayist Kimon Felix will lead us in tonight's conversation. She is the author of Dyscalculia, a love story of epic miscalculation. Love the title. And Build Yourself a Boat, which was longlisted for the 2019 National Book Award in Poetry and shortlisted for PEN Open and Lambda Literary Awards. Her poetry has appeared in Freeman's Journal, The New Yorker, and elsewhere. And her essays have been featured in Vanity Fair, New York Magazine, Teen Vogue, and other publications. So welcome. She will be in conversation tonight with our featured author, Chantal James, on her book, None But the Righteous. Miss James is many things. This is why I need my notes, because it's a long list, you guys. A third-generation HBCU alumna, a poet, a fiction writer, an essayist, a book reviewer, a Fulbright scholar, a finalist for the 2019 Alex Albright Creative Nonfiction Prize, a Vermont Studio Center Fellow, and a supreme tolerator of her annoying older sister, who is in awe of her many talents. None But the Righteous was one of Kirkus's 10 most anticipated fiction books of 2022 and an Indie Next Pick of the American Booksellers Association. It is a captivating and haunting novel, and if you haven't read it yet, shame on you, but it's okay. You can buy it tonight, and you can also check it out at this library or any of our other 25 locations. So please welcome me in welcoming Chantal James.
Thank you. Well, it's really an honor to be here because I love the DC Public Library as a reader and user of its study rooms to write. And I love my big sister, and I'm happy she got to introduce me. And this is my dear friend that I'm happy to be in conversation with. And I'm so happy and honored that she wanted to speak with me on my book. So I was going to begin with a short reading, kind of play it by ear, but I've had some success reading straight from the beginning before because I like my opening. So I'm going to read a bit from the opening of the book, and then me and Kimon are going to have a conversation on the book.
Yeah. And then you guys can ask questions. So please think of questions.
1. In which Ham finds alternate homes. When I get so lonesome for the life of the body that the thinnest slice of it will do, I start answering to names that might not otherwise turn my head. Thirsting for the earthly body, I might even stoop to drink liquor left at a crossroads for hoodoo gods, so happy to be bound up again in the cares of the flesh that I hardly care whose flesh it is. May Ham never wander far enough to know this. His body sits on a bus. His mind wanders back to wonder why he never had a place in Atlanta. One morning in Atlanta, a place growing further in time and space behind him by the moment, while he shuttles ever homeward on a bus with many others, Ham drifted out onto the porch of Mayfly's duplex to have his coffee and view the world through the steam that rose over the brim of the cup. He and I watched eerie yellows spread stain-like over each tree in view, turning the street golden as the early sun poured over it. If he squinted, Ham could see to where the strip of houses ended on one side at the parking lot of Yassine's Fish. A small figure made its way toward him from that direction, crossing under the metal signpost that held Yassine's marquee high above the waking world. The figure drew closer to Ham, growing in size through the rippled air above his coffee cup until he could see its female form, a young woman in a hoodie, walking a bicycle alongside her. Before long, he could hear the click of the revolutions of the wheels, and then he could make out Mayfly's furrowed, concentrated expression. He could see the bunch of tough-looking plants with small purple flowers that she gripped against the bicycle's handlebars. A few yards away from him, she noticed the vapor that ascended from his cup, and connecting the cup to the hand that held it, to the shape that could belong to no one but Ham at this hour, she waved brightly. By the time she'd reached the bottom of the porch stairs, she'd broken into a smile. "Good morning." She had been around the block to gather a few plants from a neighbor's garden to transplant for her own use. Ham smelled them before he could eye them up close. When the scent hit him, lavender, he seemed split for a moment into two, leaping out of himself. Next thing he could remember, he was in the living room with Mayfly in the middle of a conversation with her. He heard the words come out of him. He followed these words. He entered them and was at one with himself again. The scent of lavender sends Ham jumping out of his body. The smell of the soap Father Maughan must have used long ago, impressed in his deepest fibers. The smell that cleaved like a film to the man's skin. The smell that Ham could never wash off himself. That memory sends in a vapor from his own pores when he least suspects. I think I watch Ham so closely because he knows so well what it is to vacate the body. He has learned how to escape himself, a lesson that death offers freely, but that only a privileged, burdened few can grasp before then. I can tell you that as easily as Ham drifts off to undiscovered worlds, when this one is too strange to bear, I could drift, even in life. I could split my body in two. My body could be touched, seen, heard in two places at once, appear in deserts across the ocean as solidly as in my hometown, that ancient city peopled by indigenous ghosts. But that is another story for another hour.
So I love this haunting, sensorial, strange novel. And I'm so curious. I think I want to start with your choice of perspective in the narrator. So this technically is first person omniscient, yeah? And I guess I'm wondering how you got to the choice, like whether you knew it was going to be first person omniscient first and then you came up with a narrator, or if the narrator came to you and you wanted to like write into it.
Well, I knew that I wanted to tell the story of someone who wasn't telling the story. And I was really attracted when I heard about St. Martin, and a lot of people who have lived in history, like from some of the gurus in India to some of the saints in all kinds of traditions, who were like rumored to have these supernatural abilities. So I thought, like, this is kind of a way to get away with almost telling from a third person point of view, but not quite telling from a third person point of view because there is a narrator calling themselves I, who has a name and is a part of the story. But I feel like one of the hot topics in fiction is like, is it okay to use a first person narrator or not? But for me personally, even though I haven't always, and in my most recently completed project, it was told in third person. But for me, like, using first person really allows me to get into the story in a certain way, because, like, I'm actually entering someone's voice, and I'm actually allowing them to speak, for not to get too woo-woo or whatever, but I'm actually allowing them to speak through me. And sometimes that makes the storytelling go a little bit easier to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about the narrator that you chose. I'm trying not to give spoilers, so I'm going to be very careful. But the narrator that you chose has a particular, very like weighty history, right? It's a very identifiable narrator. Like the minute I saw, I mean, from the first page, I knew, or I had I was like, I think I know who this is going to be. How do you sort of like separate the history that comes with this kind of character from like the story that you want to tell? How do you let it live its own life?
Well, I had to just like, and I'm sorry because I just got a new phone case, and that's why my phone keeps making noise because I can't figure out how to turn it off. but it's doing that. But like, I realized that like I was not going to do like the most fidelity to Saint Martin de Porres as a historical figure, even though I did do my share of research on his life. But I realized that like I was going to have to like really take ownership of him and make him my own thing and do what I wanted to do with him and use him for my own purposes. So, and I decided to give him certain very not saintly characteristics.
Sure.
Like, and I decided that his main hang up is like, I want to go to heaven and be with Jesus, but I can't because I'm trapped here at the beck and call of people who have my bones and pieces of my clothing and things like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's the novel is like really like haunted by this character, right? Like more than anything. Like I feel like what actually happens in the interaction between this character and Ham, the main character, it's almost like they live like they are in the same body. That's a spoiler. And they live in the same world, but they're having like two different experiences. And did you ever like consider having it be first person omniscient and then first person from Ham's? And if not, like, just what was your thinking around that?
I never wanted to tell it first person from Ham's perspective, and I'm not quite sure why that is because I care a lot about him, and I feel like I know him very well, but I think it just would have been a very different book if it had been told in the first person voice of a black Southern man who's young and not that educated. You know, like I think it would have been a very different story and it would have been interesting, but it wouldn't have been doing what I was doing by choosing this omnipotent, all-powerful, disembodied, spirit to tell the story. So I chose to let Ham speak rather than telling the story himself through his actions and his interactions with people and his dialogue with people.
Yeah. So I feel like this is a coming of age novel, right? Like, and I feel like it's pretty well disguised as like other things, but at its core, it's a coming of age novel. And I realized this when I started to like pick up that the age of every character and the distance in age was really important. So like Mayfly being like 8 years older than Ham, right? Like it felt like that was a detail that you needed us to know and remember. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the coming of age novel?
Like, I'm so happy you wanted to talk about that, actually.
Yeah.
Like, because I really do see it as a coming of age story. And honestly, I don't think a whole lot of people have wanted to talk to me about that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But in my view, this is very much a story of a young man who lived a very parochial life and would have probably spent his entire life in the same city, never leaving, if he hadn't been forced into exile by the storm. And so, in my thinking, this is the story of how the devastation of that storm becomes his coming of age. And also, his becoming a father is a big part of his coming of age too, because like he's growing up to become someone who has to take responsibility for somebody else, and like his whole world is shattered by the storm, and he grows a lot. He learns Spanish and he takes on jobs, and he like sees parts of the world that he would have never been exposed to. So like,
And this is when he's able to actually like wrestle some autonomy back
exactly
from his captor, essentially.
Exactly,
right?
which
By
I-
like
which I
learning
love
Spanish
putting
and
it
learning
like
to
that.
work. Yeah,
Mhm.
I thought that was really cool. I was like, I don't think I've read a novel or even just encountered a character where the way that they win autonomy back outside of the like general parochial sense of how like autonomy works, right? Like, yes, you go and you get a job and then that gives you money and that gives you freedom. But beyond that basic understanding of how freedom works, like he was actually liberated from this like spiritual, I don't know, I guess you could call it like weight, right? By being able to work and like use his body in his own way.
Absolutely.
And I just thought that was like a really excellent metaphor.
And that's part of his coming of age too, I think, because like for most of his life he has been under the dominion of a spirit that's possessed him, and he has to gain his freedom from that as a part of his coming of age and growing into himself. And like you use this term autonomy, which I think is really good. Like that's all part of his coming of age. And so I definitely see this as a coming of age story. In so many ways, it's about the way he comes of age and grows into himself.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about how Mayfly helps to facilitate that? Like, how does Mayfly help him grow up?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I think she's definitely a big model for him. That's one of the ways that she helps him grow up, because like he really looks up to her and idolizes her, and maybe has this image of her that she can't look up to. But like with her being somebody who's like riding trains and like looks like she's so free to him, like that becomes this model for him, and it becomes this thing that he looks towards, like, man, can I ever get like that in my life? Can I ever have that? And so ultimately Mayfly is not able to fulfill his projections onto her, but I think the role she plays in his coming of age is just like giving him that thing he wants to strive for by showing him the example of somebody who is living in a totally different way than anybody he's ever met.
Yeah. And Ham ultimately is motherless, right? And Miss Pearl comes into his life as a maternal figure, but is in no way a mom, right? Because that distinction is held pretty clearly with her son, Will. Like, her son, Will, is her son, and then there's Ham. What was your thinking around how you were going to shape that dynamic? Like, why was it important for Ham to be motherless in this way?
I almost don't know if this is like an immaturity of mine as a writer, because like I feel like it's like, oh, you want to write about an orphan, okay, like you and everybody else, but like he just ends up being motherless and having this mother figure who's his foster mother. But like it was really important to me that I show her motivations towards him, and that she was not going to be like this like necessarily ideal mother figure to him, because she has her reasons that she's doing it. A, because she's getting a check. B, because she believes she's better than other people and needs to show everybody how charitable she is, you know.
So in many ways, it was about like a character study, right? Like being able to really kind of show who she was in the life of somebody like a Ham. Yeah, that's really interesting. I also thought it was so funny that like so much of the black church was like there, but like at no point did the books actually step into a church, unless I'm misremembering it, or is there actually like any real like praying happening? But like I felt, especially in the scenes where Miss Pearl was there, it felt like we were having a dialogue about benevolence, like religious benevolence and like church, right?
Definitely. Well,
It's the Black South, so like.
there is a scene where Ellis goes to church, and that's where the title comes when he's singing a
That's
song
right.
at church. But this is definitely a critical look at churchiness, being overly pious, and being uptight, and being holier than thou, and like all of that stuff.
Yeah. And I felt like Ham was the most flawed character, but still at the same time, like, the least churchy and, like, the least, I don't know, like, the least harmful while being the most flawed, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I'm happy when I get that kind of feedback because it makes me happy to get that kind of feedback because like it makes me feel like I did what I set out to do, that I was able to show somebody who does not always make the right decision and does not always do right by people, but I'm able to show him in a sympathetic way so that like you don't come off disliking him, you come off rooting for him.
Yeah. That actually is a perfect segue because I want to ask you about the title and about how you came to the title, how many times, like how long it took you to come to the title, how many drafts.
Okay, well,
All
we
that
can
stuff.
talk about this. We can talk about this. I love to talk about this. You're asking me all these cool questions.
Yeah. All stuff this is what I would ask you if nobody was here, so.
So I was listening to a Nina Simone song, and it was an old Negro spiritual called "Take Me in the Water," that she has my favorite. "Take Me to the Water," that she has my favorite version of, and it goes, "Take me to the water, take me to the water. None but the righteous shall be baptized." And I was working on this novel at this time, and I was like, oh, floodwater, baptism. That is so cool, and that is really something I want to play with. And so I had the idea early on that I wanted to title it after this song, which is actually in the common, well, I don't know what you call it, common domain, so we didn't need to get rights for it or anything, because it's a very old song. And it has so many different versions. You could YouTube it and you find so many different people singing it. But I changed, so I knew very early that I wanted to call it "None But the Righteous." Not from the beginning of writing it, but during the process of writing it. But then I had a mental breakdown when I lived in Atlanta, and voices told me to title it "Gather the Righteous." So I have distinct memories of changing the title of the manuscript to "Gather the Righteous," and I was like, this is what it has to be because this is what my ancestors told me it was. But then I kind of felt like that was too similar to an existing book that was already out there. So I was like, so eventually I changed it back to "None But the Righteous," and I'm happy about that because it has the fidelity to the song.
Totally.
And this is the first time I publicly shared that at one point it was called "Gather the Righteous." But it was called that for a good bit of the time while I was working on it.
I think both would have worked. Gather the Righteous would have worked.
And the reason it was called Gather the Righteous was because of Ham's feeling towards the end of the book that like he wanted to gather all the righteous people to him, you know?
Yeah, which I thought was really beautiful, actually. It doesn't end. It did not end for me in the way that I expected or anticipated. Like I thought that there was going to be maybe some. I don't know why I anticipated this. Perhaps because I'm like overly familiar with tropes of like Black Southern masculinity or whatever. But I just thought that there was going to be like violence or death. And at first I like wasn't sure. I like read the last page and I was like, did he die? And I read it again and I was like, no, nobody died. There's no death. Why is there no death? And then I like confronted myself. I was just like, why do you think there has to be death in like a story about like a Black Southern man? Like that's weird. So I wanted you to talk about that. Why he doesn't die.
Yeah, I like to talk. I wouldn't mind talking about that at all. I'm very interested in exploring masculinity in my work. And, like, I'm trying to get away from writing male characters now and challenging myself not to do that. And I think it's a very weird thing that this is what I'm attracted to writing as a woman who is not 100% straight, but mostly deals with men. And has no identity as anything other than a cis female. Why am I so attracted to writing about men? I don't know. But I'm happy about my portrayal of him as this young Black man who really, you can say what you want about him, but he's not a violent guy.
No.
He doesn't scrap. He doesn't carry guns. He doesn't slap people around. You know, he's a little bit shady, but he's not gonna lay hands on anybody, and I kind of like that that was never a part of him as a character. And as far as like why he didn't die or why there was no death, like I knew very early on writing this that the arc of the story is going to be, it begins when he has to leave his city and it ends with his homecoming to the city. So I didn't want to explicitly show his homecoming or depict a scene of his homecoming, but I wanted you to know he was on his way home and he was getting there. And so he needed to be alive for that. And he has so much life to live beyond being possessed by the spirit that he's been possessed by for most of his life. And I want to give him the chance to live that life, you know, and to be that father to his kid who's growing up and all of that.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I want to talk about like the writing process because I've never written a novel. For a long time, for most of my time as a writer, have always been like, I will never write a novel. You'll never catch me. It's very scary stuff. Every day I get braver. I feel like I shouldn't be getting braver, but I'm getting braver, and I'm like, maybe one day I'm gonna write a novel. So I want to talk about the novel as an undertaking, and like what it took to actually like get into the process of writing this. What did that feel like?
Well, I write across genres, but I have been very interested in pursuing the writing of novels for a while. I have written one novella and 2 novels. One is published, and that's None But the Righteous. And 2 are not published. And my first attempt at writing a novel that wanted to be a novella, so it's a novella, it was when I got my Fulbright to go to Morocco and wrote a book set there. And I was like, this is going to be my training because I don't have an MFA, and this is going to be how I train myself. And like, I'm not a short fiction writer right now. I have written short fiction, but I'm not a short fiction writer right now because when I have ideas, first of all, I don't have that many ideas to be writing a book of short stories.
Ideas are actually incredibly hard to come by. I don't know. It seems they're very expensive.
Yeah, so like when I get an idea, I want to sit with my idea for like and carry it through a couple hundred pages and like just kind of like tease it out. But like for me, my process of writing a novel is like I figure out who my characters are. I usually outline my plot. I'm not the type of a writer who doesn't know what happens. But I don't always know, but it will still surprise me how it occurs, even though I've laid down what's going to happen. It's the process of writing is constant surprising, which I'm sure you know from the genres you write. It's constant surprising because you don't know what's going to happen when you get on the page, even if you think you planned it out.
Totally.
And it's just the planning that I set in terms of getting to know my characters and tracing out my plot, and then I work towards that. When I write a novel, I try to write on a daily basis, but if that doesn't happen, I don't beat myself up about it. And I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, all of that.
But yeah.
Helpful. Yeah, not writing every day is it's hard.
I'm not writing every day right now because I'm between projects. I'm not like the type of person who's like, if you don't write every single day of your life, you're not a real writer.
Yeah, I think that's awful advice. I think we should never say those things ever. It actually is very frustrating when I hear writers say those things because we all know that it's just not that simple. Like if it really were as simple as like just write every day, then we'd all publish books. Like we can all find 20 minutes to write a page, but like it actually takes much more than that. And like also sometimes you don't have the day, like the page in you. You don't have the 20 minutes. You don't have the energy. It's hard. It's just really hard work.
I mean, there's like crisis that can happen in your life that prevents you from writing. I spent a lot of time not writing because I was crushed by disappointments in my publishing career.
Yeah.
And I was discouraged. And I've lost years that way.
Yeah.
Not
totally.
writing. You know, so you gotta be, you just have to feel it and you just have to have it. And I mean, there are writers who write one book in their lives that is awesome and they're valid. And that's their reputation and they don't have to do a thing else in their life.
I know they go off and they live in the middle of nowhere and no one sees them for 20 years and then they pop out with Corregidora.
Exactly.
I wanted to talk a little bit about neurodivergence and how that shows up in the book because Ham is clearly not like everybody else. Like his brain does not function the same way as everybody else. I think we learned that in like chapter 2, right, or chapter 3.
Right.
And I just wanted to talk about how we write characters who are neurodivergent, especially as neurodivergent writers.
Right.
And what that feels like.
Well, I did not medicalize anybody in my book and diagnose them with anything.
Yeah.
But I do think Ham has a tendency to dissociate due to the trauma he's experienced, which is what makes him vulnerable to spirit possession. And that comes from the traumatic childhood that he had. And I will also say that, like, I feel like my book is trippy because I've had experiences with madness. And I feel like things like just getting supernatural and surreal
Totally.
and things like that. Like that's stuff that comes to me because I've been there and because I walk in different realms. You know what I mean?
Unfortunately, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah. And I think like it's actually really hard to write neurodivergence as a neurodivergent person, to like keep that separation of not like superimposing your own experience with neurodivergence on your characters, and like how did you maintain that distance? Because Ham is possessed but never goes mad. He actually never experiences madness, right? Which like I was a little jealous. I was a little pissed off.
Well, the one thing I can say about that is that, like, I am not really the type of writer who seeks to write a character like me.
Totally.
And a lot of writers are, and I'm not knocking it because some of them do it quite well. And you can't knock it because they do it incredibly well. But for me, I don't choose to write about myself. I choose to write to escape myself. And so I never wanted to give characters my qualities necessarily. I did lend some of my biographical details, but in terms of my personality or like me being neurodivergent or anything like that, I never even had the inclination because I wanted them to be like different people that weren't me because I'm tired of being me. I want to be somebody else, and that's why I'm writing.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's the best part about writing fiction, right? I mean, I haven't written a novel, but I spent a lot of time writing fan fiction when I was younger. Lots of fan fiction, Harry Potter-based fan fiction. And those were some of the best days of my life, like being Hermione Granger for the 3 days that I wrote that chapter was amazing, right? Like, it's an opportunity to step outside of yourself. Do you feel like you got to do that in this novel?
Definitely. That's what I always try to do when I write fiction. I don't want to be me. I don't want to be me. I'm like, being me is not fun if you want to be real. So I'm not trying to be me when I write.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think I'll turn it this way. If there are questions, curiosities, comments, investigations.
Oh, my next project, I don't mind talking about it. It's not published, but I don't mind.
But it will be.
Yes, we hope, inshallah.
Inshallah.
So, but my next project is actually set in Washington, D.C., where I've been living for a while now. And it's set during the crack epidemic. And because I really wanted to show that in fiction, the way that this city in particular dealt with that and was devastated by that. And the way everybody everywhere around you was a hollowed out crack zombie. You know what I mean? And the way the guns were everywhere and the blood was everywhere and the police were everywhere and everything like that. And so it's set during that time, and I won't give too much away, but it's about a man's quest for immortality after his son dies, who is a black professional living in Southwest DC during the crack epidemic.
I can't wait to read that. Why a man this time again?
I don't know, and I'm not trying to write a man again because I'm like, please stop doing this, Chantal. Oh, like, please stop writing about men.
I would say that they're fascinating, but it's not quite true. Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know, but there's also certain ways that I'm exploring masculinity.
Sure.
Like, I was in the new one that's not out or anywhere close to that. I wanted to explore this idea that like men want to live on through their children and are like invested in carrying on a legacy through their kids. So I wrote about somebody that's his complete obsession, and his world is completely shattered when he loses his son because of that.
I mean, that's the fundamental basis of patriarchy and paternalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to see how you take that on. Because I would just write one sentence, it's like, patriarchy is bad. Yeah. Any other questions? Follow up? There's a mic coming.
What are you guys reading right now?
Oh, I can
Both
show
of you.
you what I'm reading because it's in my bag. I'm reading Jamel Brinkley's Witness, which is amazing stories, set in New York, where Kimona's from,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like stories about black people, and it's really great. And my second book I'm reading right now is A Spell of Good Things, that my friends who are African writers kept telling me, you got to read this book. And it arrived to my house. I'm from bookshop.org.
Period.
On the day that it was announced on the Booker Prize long list.
Huh. That's amazing. I am reading a book called Cruel Optimism by Lauren Berlant. I'm reading a lot of social theory right now because I'm writing social theory and I want to kill myself. So, yeah, it's about the way that sociality is structured in a way that is paradoxical. So, like, the things that we are attracted to, that the optimisms that we're attracted to are ultimately really bad for us. Like, we desire for like financial happiness and financial freedom, but really that requires that we like work really hard under a capitalist patriarchal structure that like requires us to work really hard so that we make money for the system. Stuff like that.
She's really smart.
I'm just like trying to catch up. I'm really behind in life, so yeah. I think we had another question. Yeah.
I was for the follow-up when you were talking about how you wanted to have Ham be there for his term.
Mm-hmm.
So first question, are you going to revisit these characters, you think, and maybe continue his story? And then secondly, I haven't read the book, but actually three questions. Another one would be, what do you want reader most to take away from your story? And then third, what for somebody who you sort of talked a little bit about it, but what do you think would be a valuable piece of advice for people who want to write?
Okay, you ask a lot of
I
questions.
think I remember them. The first one is, are you going to revisit these
Oh yes,
characters?
no, I will never be revisiting these characters because the story is in there is over.
Yeah. And the second question, what do you want people to take away?
I'm only gonna be able to tell you one thing that comes to the top of my mind rather than a superlative of all time that I want a reader to take away. But I want a reader to feel like they have read something that has caused them to think about what home means, what we call home, and what belonging means, what we mean when we say we belong or feel like we belong. But if you ask me on a different day, I'll give you a different answer.
And the last question was, what is your advice for writers?
Oh, my biggest advice for writers is read as much as you can, because I'm not a fan of these writers who don't read. You got to read as much as you can, and I think you need to seek mentorship. Try and find somebody who's doing what you want to do. And writers are nice. Well, I mean, but it's not terribly hard to find somebody that can like offer you advice, give you some friendly tips, get in community with other writers. That is a big, 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 big thing. Hook up with other people who are writing, fellowship with them. You can read each other's stuff. You can encourage each other on, and those are my tips.
Yeah. And on a craft level, I guess I would say, like, don't get so concerned with, like, stipulations. Like, oh, you have to write every day, or, like, you must write 10 pages. Like, if you have a project and you have to, like, finish something, then, like, you should set some boundaries for yourself that are useful. But, like, write when you feel moved and, like, write from a real place.
I will say my most recently completed manuscript I wrote over 4 years, And sometimes my goal would be like 250 words a day.
A literal paragraph.
Yeah, and it was like, okay, I did that. So
Yeah, I wrote a paragraph today. I'm real proud of that paragraph. Yeah.
This is gonna probably sound like a weird question, but I was thinking about it struck me when you said, read, like one of your advice is to read as much as you can. I'm curious what books you were influenced by in writing this book. Because I'm reading the A Wrinkle in Time quintet.
Oh, love it.
I'm
best.
reading it with my daughter right now, and I'm in the third one. And the elements in the third one, in Wrinkle in Time, there's like kiving.
The
and
third one is a swiftly tilting planet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm curious. Like I was thinking about that today, and I was like, oh, there's shadows of that a little bit. I could see shadows of that in your book, and I'm not saying Wrinkle in Time or Swiftly Tilting Planet was influencing, but just curious, what books were influential in your book?
Well, for me, I'm not the kind of writer who's like easily able to say, "Oh, this absolutely was my influence."
Yeah.
I absolutely know for a fact that this book influenced me. I just, you know me because you grew up with me. I just have been reading a ton since I knew how to read, forever, and I'm still reading a ton. So I just absorb a lot of books, and out of that, it's a mishmash that happens when I write, and I'm not necessarily able to trace exactly what influences what I write. But I will say that like a lot of the stuff, I mean, who's not influenced by Toni Morrison? Nobody. Everybody's influenced by Toni Morrison. But yeah, a lot of the stuff she was able to do with the supernatural was an influence to me. Writers like Gabriel Garcia Marquez of the South American tradition and the fabulous stuff that he was able to do was an influence on me. In setting out to write this book, I was never like, I'm going to write this book that's going to be like that book. My influences happen very organically because like I read so much. So I'm not always able to say like, yes, this influenced me. I know for a fact. I just know that I read a lot and there are writers that I admire a lot. But as far as what I do when I sit down, I'm not always clear on drawing the direct lines to what I've been influenced by.
I have a question. I'm curious, your book is very lyrical, I guess is what I would call it. How did you choose sort of that voice? Like, how did you choose the voice that you wanted the book to be written in? Because it's very lyrical as opposed to be, it's very lyrical as opposed to being very, I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Like, literal.
Uh-huh. Well, I think this ties really nicely to the question Kimon asked me about my narrator, because once I chose the kind of narrator that I chose, that was kind of what happened with the language. But I will also say that my language that I choose when I write fiction is heavily influenced by the fact that I write poetry, and I always think about language on the level of the sentence and the level of the line. And I always think about if the sentence doesn't smack, it's not happening. It has to be every I'm about to draw a superlative that I can't live up to, but I was about to say every single sentence has to be, but no, every single sentence is not going to be great because you're going to have some sentences that aren't top tier in there. But I do think about the sentence, and I do think about trying to just provide that gratification to a reader on the sentence by sentence level.
You did that.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hello, thank you for this conversation. I have a question about, I know you said that you like to write in the voice of, not in the voice, but about a lot of like main, men characters. And there's like this saying that people throw around that I don't necessarily like, which is like, write what you know. And I struggle with that so much as a writer because I want to write about so many things. So what do you feel about that kind of phrase, like, write what you know?
I'm not a write what you know person. I've written a memoir that's not published that had excerpts published, and that was an example of me writing what I know. But when I write fiction, I don't write what I know. I don't want to write what I know. I want to learn. I want to use my curiosity. And now to do that responsibly, you have to undertake research, which I did. But I never think people should be limited by what they know in writing. I mean, if that's what floats your boat to write what you know, do it, because a lot of people do that very well. But if you're the type of writer who's more inspired by the curiosity about what you don't know, I think it's perfectly fine to use writing as a means of coming to know something. Just do your research and get involved so that you can write about what you don't know with ethics.
And it doesn't have to be a moral destination, right? Like your decision about whether or not you write about what you know or whether you write about what you do know is a craft decision. That just comes down to like what you're in the mood to make and like what's inspiring you and what's not. But you could very well, like, one project can be you writing about what you know and that's good, and then another project can be you writing about something you don't know anything about, and like that's good too. I think it's just whatever you're down to do.
Yeah. The bottom line is that is not set in stone that you must write what you know. If you want to, do it.
There are no rules except for the rules. Another question?
When you mentioned research, it made me think. I've heard a lot of talks about authors who have been doing research said that there was a lot of issues with COVID in terms of going in person. Did you have any of those issues, or did you find stuff online? And you probably get this question a lot. Has your writing changed due to COVID since you sort of started this before and you're working at
Well,
during?
yeah, my novel was written way before COVID. Way before COVID. It took a long time to publish, so COVID wasn't not really a factor in my research. And I was able to do things like travel to New Orleans and couch surf with my friends and feel out the city as part of my research and things like that.
Any more questions? Cool. So I think we're gonna do some book signing. Yeah. And that's it. But last call for questions. Cool. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Come on.